Hello, my name is Ashley Nicole Green, and I'm the managing attorney with the Law Office of A. Green.
Hi, I'm John B. Henry III, attorney and counselor at law.
And I'm Alicia Lindsay Pottinger from the ALP Law Firm.
And we are Suite 130.
130.
We are three separate law firms together to support our state and local communities affected by Hurricane Harvey. Stronger Together is a series of videos focused on important legal topics in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, including FEMA claims, insurance claims, family law, and employment law issues.
Okay, so let's get started with employment rights when tragedy strikes.
So, Alicia, what if someone's lost their job in the wake of Hurricane Harvey? What advice would you give them?
Well, if you've lost your job as a result of Hurricane Harvey, please look to the state unemployment Texas Workforce Commission. They have unemployment benefits that are specifically designated if you live or if your employer, if you lost your job because your employer is no longer in existence or has some reduced hours or reduced workforce based on Hurricane Harvey. In addition to that, you may have already been on unemployment that may continue, and there may be some additional funding that may be for you based on Hurricane Harvey. There may be a situation where you may not have to even give, like normally when you apply for unemployment benefits, you have to turn in your job searches. Well, based on the devastation of a particular area, the Texas Workforce Commission will let you know if you don't have to do any work searches because there's not enough jobs. But I don't think that that's a situation that we'll have here in Harris County and other surrounding counties. Well, maybe our smaller counties may have that particular situation. But please wait for the Texas Workforce Commission to give you that information that you don't need to do a work search. In addition to that, there's another provision in the state code. It's called the Texas Disaster Evacuation Discrimination Act, and that's in our Texas code. And what that does is, if they declared it was a political subdivision, the governor, the national powers that be declare that there's a national disaster and that there's a mandatory evacuation at that time, and you leave your employer in order to go and evacuate, then your job is going to be protected. If your employer terminates you based on the fact that you left to do a mandatory evacuation, then your employer is going to have to reinstate your job or find you another position that pays that's comparable to the position that they've terminated you for, and also pay you a comparable salary for that. Those protections are there, with the exception of if you were a police officer, an emergency care worker, or something like that, or let's even put it in the context like you're a disaster relief person, or you work for CenterPoint Energy or an energy company that needs to run up the poles and provide services, water, for the public's basic needs, then you're going to be exempt from that particular statute because they need you out there as a workforce to get the services up and running during that disaster time.
Now, does that statute apply to every employer-employee relationship?
It does. It is for private attorneys. Attorneys. I'm an attorney. What can I say? But bottom line, it applies for private employers and also state employers. And what was good about it is that there's no minimum employee requirement. Some particular federal statutes have those caps on there.
Now, what if I have been injured or an ill family member has become ill due to the storms? are there any protections? Is there any advice or law that you would direct people to learn more about what their rights are?
Yes. One of the things that you probably already are familiar with, or most people who have had births in their family and so forth, the Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, is something that will protect you in the event that you have a situation and you have a family member, a spouse. They say immediate representative. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my screen up here. It doesn't want to act right, but let me go back. And so one of the things that's very important when you deal with the Family Medical Leave Act is that you want to make sure that your employer is eligible. How do you know your employer is eligible? Your employer is eligible if they have at least 50 or more workers, and those 50 more workers need to be within a 75-mile radius of the place in which you're working. Another thing that you want to make sure that you've done is that you've worked for that employer for at least 1 year prior to you having to file that claim, because it will give you some relief from your not having to show up at your job. You may have run out of we'll say sick benefits or any other benefits, but it will hold your job for a certain short period of time to give you time to help your immediate family, your spouse, your children, and other your mothers, fathers, and other immediate family members. But not only in addition to that you would have needed to work a year ahead, but you would have needed to have 1,250 hours worth of work, which prior to filing for divorce, I keep saying divorce, family law is in my brain, before filing for this family medical leave request. Because, and that, just to give you some math on that, that means that you would have worked approximately, if you were doing a 40-hour a week, that would have been equating up to 31.25 weeks of employment prior to filing that.
And thank you for doing the math.
So, and so if your employer, if you meet those particular requirements, then it's important that you can get some relief. That also applies if you work for a federal government or state political subdivision and so forth. Look for those posters that you see at your job. It'll say FMLA. That's going to give you an indication of whether or not your employer covers you. Now, if you're an employer, if you don't have that particular benefit, don't put those postings up there, because you could be held liable for a Family Medical Leave Act and not really be an eligible employer. But if you put it out there and you give those benefits, then we're going to expect and hold your foot to the fire that you're going to follow through with those particular benefits.
Now, what if I'm injured as a result of the storm? And does my employer have to make adjustments to my work environment?
Well, what you're talking about and what most people are familiar with is the American Disabilities Act. And what that American with Disabilities Act, unlike the Family Medical Leave Act, under the ADA, the employer only needs to have 15 employees within a 75-mile radius. And if they have 15 or more employees, then that employer is responsible to make reasonable accommodation. And when we use the term reasonable accommodation, it's not reasonable for them to build another building and so forth just so that you can work. The accommodations has to be reasonable, and more importantly, you must be able to fulfill the essential job functions of that job, the essential job functions. So if it says that you need to be able to read and write and you can't read and write, then the employer doesn't have to make a reasonable accommodation because you don't meet the requirements of the essential job function that you need. And so when an employer can make reasonable accommodations, some of those accommodations can be switching out and doing alternative workflow schedule, maybe staggered shifts, and other things is to provide some assistive equipment, some assistive devices if you have a hearing problem or something like that. But bottom line, just because if you're perceived as having an injury, you have an injury that's considered a disability, and how the Disabilities Act defines that is if you have a disability that affects a major life activity, then at that particular point it will be a disability that will be covered under the ADA.
Now, assuming that someone has been discriminated against, where would they file a claim for discrimination? Does that begin the process? How would they take the first step?
There's two ways that you can do it. Here in Texas, you can go to the Texas Workforce Commission and file a claim, or you can go to the EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. They have different, you can check the web, they have different places where you can file those particular complaints. And what you need to do is be specific about how you've been discriminated against and how they treated you differently as a result of having this disability or perceived disability. Okay.
Now, have there been any tax relief measures that the Internal Revenue Service have provided employers or employees that you're aware of today?
Basically, what we found out as a result of Hurricane Harvey, that they're giving some extensions for employers or employees, whether individuals or businesses, from August 23rd, 2017 to January 31st, 2018 to file tax returns. Also, too, there may be some qualifying retirement accounts that you may be able to use to help with getting back on your feet. And the IRS may be waiving certain provisions and allowing for hardship withdrawals without certain penalties. Both are contingent on you being a resident in the disaster designated county. And so in order to prevail yourself of that benefit, I would encourage you to talk to your CPA or a tax attorney or one of the persons that provide services at one of the tax clinics. Okay.
Well,
that is some really, really good information. Thank you so much for that. Just so you guys know, disclaimer, we are not tax attorneys. We cannot provide you with tax advice. So please consult with the tax attorney to get information about that specifically.
So thank you again for watching this video on employment law when disaster strikes. Please like us and share us this video so that others can access the information and the resources here. I'm Alicia Lindsay Pottinger with the ALP Law Firm.
I'm John B. Henry III, attorney and counselor at law.
And I'm Ashley Nicole Green, the managing attorney with the Law Office of A. Green. And remember,
We're stronger together.